All right, House of the Dragon. Let's talk House of the Dragon. This is the new show from HBO and George R. R. Martin. It's a prequel, sort of a prequel. I don't even know if you'd call it a prequel to Game of Thrones because it's set like 200 years before the events that take place in Game of Thrones. So it's almost, I mean, when you're talking about that much distance in time, what happens doesn't directly impact, other than historically, Daenerys and Jon Snow and everybody. Unlike Game of Thrones, this is mostly a court intrigue show. It's a show about succession to the Iron Throne, but not like between a bunch of different warring factions. In Game of Thrones, we had, Robb Stark, King in the North. You had Joffrey Baratheon. You had both Stannis and Renly Baratheon. And you had Balon, is it Balon Greyjoy? Anyways, 5 different kings sort of warring for the throne or for control of their own territories. Whereas here, you're mostly focused on the Targaryens and the Targaryen dynasty, which has been going on since Aegon the Conqueror. And right now, in the events of House of the Dragon, has passed on to King Viserys I. Who was the grandson of the Jaehaerys, the previous king, who had like 12 kids, but all his male heirs died. And there was this question of does the throne go to his daughter or to his grandson? And the grandson gets it because Westeros, the 7 kingdoms, whatever, like medieval England, which this is based off of, is a predominantly patriarchal society, right? Like the king is the firstborn heir is typically becomes the king, right? If the firstborn heir dies or is a child when the previous king dies, there's always all kinds of trouble. And that's where we find ourselves with Viserys, who's in this episode, his wife goes into labor with their child, and it's breached, so they cannot give a successful labor. She was not going to give birth to a living child, and the Grand Maester, gives Viserys the choice to save the mother or save the child, and he chooses to approve the C-section, which of course back then was done without, well, not back then, but in this medieval times of the show, the fantasy show, you can't really, the mother's going to die with a C-section. So they save the baby, the mother, the queen, dies, and then the baby dies shortly after. So that's a super, I think that was probably the most powerful and gut-wrenching scene of the episode. Because, man, that's rough. What's really rough about it is that Viserys and his wife, Aemma, I think is her name, clearly love each other and clearly want, this was a really horrific decision for him to make. It was not a callous decision. He was thinking very much like he needs to preserve his line. He needs to ensure a succession with a male heir, yada, yada, yada. But it doesn't work, and it's almost like he's cursed. So he names his daughter, who is about 15 years old, his daughter Rhaenyra, as his heir, which is super controversial because in this society, girls simply do not inherit the throne, which was proved when Viserys took the throne. He, by the way, got it based on a vote from the council and noblemen and whatnot, because Jaehaerys couldn't pick. The heir apparent up to this point is Daemon Targaryen, Viserys' younger brother, played by Matt Smith. Viserys is played by Paddy Considine. I'm going to forget a lot of the actors' names, and I'm not going to just read them off as I talk. But Daemon is a hot-headed, roguish type character. He's brash and does what he wants and doesn't care what anybody thinks about it, and causes all kinds of trouble and headaches. So a lot of people on the small council don't trust him. I think he's too impulsive and reckless and dangerous, especially Otto Hightower, the hand of the king, and was also hand of the previous king, and one of the most powerful men in the realm, and kind of a Littlefingerish type character, although much more sober-minded, but certainly a scheming, plotting politician. which we'll see more of as the show goes on. So, the reason that Daemon is passed over in the end, he's caused some trouble with the small council and the king already, because he's been put in charge of the gold cloaks, which he turns into a fiercely loyal fighting force for him. And they are basically his men at this point. And he goes out into the city and he cracks down on crime really hard and really viciously, like lopping off people's limbs, killing people in the street, striking fear into the populace. This is Daemon cares much more about being feared, whereas Viserys cares about being loved. And so there's a little bit of the Machiavellian thing going on there. Daemon thinks that through fear, through force, through shows of strength, that's how you rule. Whereas Viserys, he's a really nice guy. He's nothing like Daenerys' brother Viserys in Game of Thrones. He's a nice guy. He loves his daughter. He loves his wife. He loves his people. He wants to have feasts and tourneys and everyone to just get along. And he doesn't want to deal with problems. He doesn't want to deal with this war over in the steppes, the stepstones. He doesn't want to lend military aid to the Sea Snake, another powerful, not Targaryen, but Valyrian household that the Lord of Driftmark. Anyways, that's sort of establishes Daemon's personality, which is like, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. I'm gonna take control of the situation in as violent a manner as I need to be. He does not flinch at violence or at, he's very much a ends justify the means type character. And this goes against the grain of kind of the peaceful rule that both Viserys and his grandfather Jaehaerys sort of had, or do. Their style of governance is not Daemon's style. And this sort of comes to a head when after the queen dies in this horrible birth gone badly wrong, and then the baby dies. Daemon has a party. He has a party with the officers of his gold cloaks, the city watch, and a bunch of whores. And at this sort of orgiastic party, he apparently gives a speech. He doesn't give it on screen. We find out about it from Otto Hightower later. But he toasts his dead nephew, the dead baby, as king or heir for a day, which is, having a celebration when your brother's, wife and child die it's not cool. It's odd because Daemon is such an interesting character. He doesn't, at this party, he doesn't even look like he's having fun. It's like he's doing it to get in trouble. It's like he's doing it, even though he clearly wants to be the heir, or says he wants to be the heir. He may not really, or he may be playing a deeper game. Whatever the case, when he's at this party, he doesn't look like he's having a great time. But he gives this speech, and he has the party. So this really upsets Viserys, and Viserys sends Daemon away. He's played by Matt Smith, and his name is Daemon. So one of these days, I'm going to say Matt Damon. I just know it. Anyways, he basically he doesn't like officially banish him, but he sort of like quasi banishes him. He sends him away, and Daemon heads off to Dragonstone, sort of the seat of Targaryen power before they just took over everything. This means that Rhaenyra is named successor to Viserys, despite being a girl. And Viserys makes the lords all swear fealty and promise that they'll support her, but it's clear that this is still a very tenuous situation. If there is some other option other than a girl, a lot of the powerful people, men of Westeros, will back that person. So we sort of set the stage for future strife, future civil war. I I don't know if you've read about any of this, but this show is about a dance of dragons, which is a large sort of civil war between different Targaryen and Valyrian factions, right? Which I won't spoil in this video. Suffice to say, there will be blood, fire and blood. So, really, there's a lot of stage setting in the first half of this season. Just kind of to let you know about the next 5 episodes after this, there's lots of time jumps. Lots of time passes in the first, by this, couple episodes in, you're going to have several years pass. After episode 5, there's a time jump of 10 years, and several actors are replaced by, new actors, older actors. They're aged up, which is sort of jarring, but be ready for it. I like the new actors that are older, but I really liked the young actors. Millie Alcock, who plays, or is it Ali? Yeah, it's Millie Alcock, who plays Rhaenyra, is fantastic. Her friend Alicent, the actress who plays young Alicent, is also fantastic. Alicent Hightower, who's the daughter of Otto Hightower. So several of these actors are replaced. All of the older actors, Daemon, Viserys, Otto Hightower, all of these, they all stay the same. But younger actors are replaced. And sometimes I will admit some of the ages seem a little off in the casting. Like a character seems very young in one episode and then is aged up like way further than another actor later on. So all the aging up in time jumps is kind of weird. This episode actually, though, this opening episode is one of the strongest, I think, of the season, because just a lot happens. We have the joust, the tourney or whatever, where we meet Kristen Cole. Anyways, he's like this, not a very high-ranking nobleman, but a very good fighter, and he actually beats Daemon in the tourney. Seems like a very heroic kind of figure. We meet, some of the Kingsguard. We get that whole scene in Flea Bottom with the gold cloaks just messing everybody up. That was pretty exciting. We see some dragons. There's going to be dragons in like every episode of this show. I have to say that so far, the dragons haven't been like that interesting or impressive to me. But I have been watching screeners, which have some work in progress special effects. More to what I would say is that we don't get enough time, like, with the dragons on a kind of an emotional level, like the characters bonding with the dragons, like, but I don't know. We'll see. That could change. Maybe that's not as important as I'm making it out to be. All around, I thought this was a pretty strong episode, a pretty strong introduction to these characters, to this world. It also sort of sets the stage not just for this coming, looming civil war, but also like what to expect from this show, which is a lot more just sort of slow-paced, dialogue-centric, scheming, plotting, politicking, and a lot of Targaryens. Like this is not it's not like Game of Thrones where you have the Lannisters and the Starks. I mean, there are Lannisters and Starks, but they're not important, right? It's really just the Targaryen family that is important, and whoever's kind of directly related to them, like the Sea Snake, who is Valerian and married to Rhaenys, the queen who never was, right? The woman who was passed over when Viserys became king. But really, this is a much more intimate, like, small group of characters, and location-wise, similarly, like, well, yes, we're going to see other locations other than King's Landing and the Red Keep, but the vast majority of this show takes place right there. So, at least at first. So we're going to get a lot more of a look at, like, what's going on there. In terms of everything else, I think the acting, everyone's fantastic. It's a really well-cast show. The costume design, the special effects, the score, all which is very similar to Game of Thrones, right? Same composer and same like theme. But there's some differences in the actual show. But really, like, the production values are terrific. It's a lot of fun to watch. It's very It's very lavishly produced. It's an expensive looking show, right? Which, some of these other fantasy shows that we've seen try to contend with Game of Thrones, kind of like become the new Game of Thrones, have not felt expensive and lavish and like detail oriented. Like the Wheel of Time felt cheap, even though, everyone's like, well, they spend so much money on it, but it always looked cheap, It's one of the things that bothered me about that show is it always sort of felt like you're looking at a set. This feels real, like you're looking at real places. Similarly, like even The Witcher, although I really like the first season of The Witcher, and even though they clearly spent more on the second season, a lot of the times that show feels a little cheap. And this, this does not. This feels expensive. This feels immersive. You feel like you're in a real place, in a real, historical, well-realized city and castle and world. So, yeah, and it's a brutal world, right? The jousting often turns deadly, and just to be a woman to give birth can be such a deadly thing, right? And so that, again, I think that was the most powerful scene in the episode. It's just so damn sad and gut-wrenching and tragic and ultimately like pointless. But this, this was how, this is how it was in the medieval times. And this, this is the story, whereas Game of Thrones was a reimagining of the War of the Roses, sort of at the end of the Plantagenet dynasty. This is sort of like the beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty, right? This is, we had similar, it was the anarchy in English history, where the king's nephew and the king's daughter, Stephen and Matilda, ended up warring over who would get, rise to the throne of England and Normandy and France. And this is a very similar story. So, some people have said, well, this show is too woke. Like it's not. Like, yes, there's a little bit more diversity in the casting, but it's actually kind of, they keep it kind of sensible. Like it's not just randomly, different, like everyone's just like this grab bag of like racial backgrounds, like the Driftwood family, like the Lord Corvus, I'm forgetting his name right now, but his brother, like some of his people from Driftmark, the Valerians, are dark skinned, right? They're black, with white hair. It's a pretty cool look, actually. But most of the people of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros are still white, right? This is not just like token diversity. Like it's a little more diverse, but it's kept within what I like to say like logical confines. People from here are this color. People from here are this color, because this is a medieval society, not a contemporary society. Makes sense. And this the girl stuff, like Rhaenyra wanting to, chafing at her like role as a woman, I think that's all done really well. And again, it's not unrealistic. There were, women who tried to become the ruler, the queen, not just the queen because they were married to the king, but like the ruling queen in English history, and were snubbed by the nobility, and had to fight and supported by some of the nobility. And so like, this is realistic. This is not woke or whatever. And it's quite dark and it's quite grim. And there's going to be some weird, really unsettling incesty stuff coming. So buckle in. I think, for all my criticisms of it, which is that I think it does move too slow at times, and we'll get to that later in future episodes. I think that sometimes it spins its wheels unnecessarily. It's an interesting show about succession and dragons. So let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you for watching. And I will be making a video for each subsequent episode, as well as a post at Forbes. And let me know what you think. Peace.